asking for a piece of equipment or a service, a reasonable accommodation without having it being a hardship for the company.
Job Insights, a podcast to help you carve out your career pathway and enhance the opportunities for gainful employment.
I think what's really important to remember when you're looking at reasonable accommodations is that you as the employee are expected to essentially know what kinds of things you might need.
Learn about resources for training, education, and employment opportunities.
So some of these apps that are available to us today can also work in the workplace, and that's a great thing. We just use them for everyday stuff, but when you can utilize them in the workplace, that's a plus.
We will hear from people seeking careers, employment, from professionals in the educational field, teachers, and innovators in this ever-changing world of technology.
They're not going to do it all for you. It's very much so an interactive process where you guys are both coming to the table with ideas and then coming up to a resolution together.
A lot of creative ideas are out there. It always doesn't have to come down to the big dollars. For more podcasts with a blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com, on Twitter at blindabilities, and download our free Blind Abilities app from the App Store. That's 2 words, Blind Abilities.
Because we really do want to see you working, and we'd hate for something like an accommodation to be what stands between you being able to work successfully, especially in the right supportive environment.
And now please welcome Serina Gilbert and Jeff Thompson with Job Insights.
Three, two, one. Welcome to Job Insights. This is Serina Gilbert with my co-host Jeff Thompson, all the way from Minnesota. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Serina?
I'm doing well. Working on requesting some accommodations for myself on my current job.
Are they reasonable?
I think they are, but we'll have to see, how that goes. I figured that this would be a great time to maybe chat about the process that I'm going through to request some accommodations and offer some tips for how an employer might look at what you might see as a reasonable accommodation and see what tips Jeff might have too.
Yeah, asking for a piece of equipment or a service, a reasonable accommodation without having it being a hardship for the company. You have to step up to the plate and advocate for yourself. So it's kind of a challenging endeavor, but you're doing it for the right reasons, and this is how you go about it. So I'm glad we're having this discussion, and I'm glad you're bringing this to our listeners and sharing your experiences with us.
It kind of is. I honestly haven't had to request any accommodations officially, I guess, since I got hired. 9 years ago. When I got hired, I still was part of the DVR system as a client, so my current counselor then helped me getting all those reasonable accommodations requested. Now, as the years have passed, technology's advanced. I'm starting to have things that need to be updated. For example, I have a work cell phone, and it's our company's policy to buy Android phones. We all know there's obviously some accessibility features in an Android phone, but I'm way more efficient using an iOS device. So I advocated for myself through our ADA coordinator to see if I could have an exception made so that they could purchase an iPhone for me. And that was granted because of the accessibility features.
Serina, is that a form you fill out, or is there a process that you have to go through?
There is a process, but there's no official form that I have to fill out. I just have to send an email to our ADA coordinator outlining what my reasonable accommodation request is, talking about the specific item, and I also add, here's the essential functions of the job that this will empower me to be able to do. As an example with the iPhone, because yes, I probably could figure out how to use the Android phone, but I wouldn't be very efficient or effective at my job if I'm spending so much time fighting with the phone to send a text message, So I told them, there's significantly higher level of accessibility features in the iPhone. This is the device I'm most comfortable with. This will allow me to be able to text with my clients since I do work with young adults, as well as be able to use it to request ride shares and things like that to be able to get around town for my job. She literally came back, I think it was pretty quickly, and said, approved, proceed with, getting this ordered. So it doesn't have to be a novel, but you do have to address what is the essential function that whatever you're requesting is empowering you to be able to do.
Great.
So Jeff, we can't just buy you, your brand new AirPods because it'd be cool to not have a wire in your way while you're using your computer with JAWS. Because a wired set would work just as well,
Well, it makes sense. The accessibility that you know about, so you advocated for yourself and it went through. I suppose other people have at your employment that are visually impaired have done probably the same thing.
Yeah, and just as a side note, like all requests like that are always kept confidential. So unless they share with me what requests they've put in and what kinds of things they've received, then I honestly would never know what accommodations they have in place, and nor should I. It's really none of anyone else's business what accommodations somebody has. I'd imagine that they're going through the same process as well.
Well, when your coworkers send you SMS or if they send you a iPhone message.
Yeah. And not everyone has a work cell phone in our agency either. It's really dependent on your job function.
Yeah. I think what it comes down to is your responsibility to do the essential duties that you took on. It may have been something that you recognized earlier that you would have to be able to get some reasonable accommodations to help do that essential duty. This is something that is different for everybody, whether you're totally blind, low vision, a partial, high partial, that there's going to be different types of tools, different type of accommodations for everyone as an individual.
I think what's really important to remember when you're looking at reasonable accommodations is that you as the employee are expected to essentially know what kinds of things you might need. We're not asking you to be an expert on everything, but your ADA coordinator is certainly not going to be an expert on every disability that they work with. And yes, if you request a reasonable accommodation, but you're not really sure what that might be. So for example, it could be, hey, this printer's not accessible. You know, it's got a touch screen on it. I don't know what device would make it more accessible or if purchasing a new printer would be what I need. That's okay, but they're going to ask you to do some research as well, probably. They're not going to do it all for you. It's very much so an interactive process where you guys are both coming to the table with ideas and then coming up to a resolution together.
And yes, you definitely want to be involved. You just don't want to give this up to somebody else to decide for you.
Well, yeah, you don't want them giving you something that maybe you don't even know how to use, you know? Mm-hmm. And with that said, here's the tricky part. Jeff's talked about this a lot. You're a Mac user. You know how to use VoiceOver. Your workplace is using PC with JAWS. It is probably not a reasonable accommodation to ask them to buy you a Mac instead of a PC because that's what you know how to use, because that's completely changing that business approach and business strategy. Like having a Mac and PCs on the same network is probably a logistical nightmare, I'd imagine. I'm sure it's possible, but most companies, especially like government agencies and things like that, have pretty strict rules and systems that can only run on a PC, for example. It could cause an undue hardship to that employer, meaning that it's either causing significant stress on the company, like logistically or financially. Keep in mind that although you might request a reasonable accommodation, it could possibly not get approved because it's either determined that it's not necessary to perform the essential duties of your job, or it's an undue hardship.
And in situations when you're in an office, it seems like we're always talking about people in the office, but there are a lot of other jobs out there. But when they do provide like a PC laptop, the reasonable accommodation may be to have JAWS installed in there and make sure that the browser works with it. So they might be a team from the state, depending on what level of job you're in, division you're in. They might have technical people that try and work that out for you. That's reasonable, especially depending upon the size of the company. I think that's realistic. We've always stressed that you should know more than one platform. And if you're going into the job market, a huge percent of companies are going to be using the PC or the Microsoft platform, and that's where JAWS would come in, NVDA. But a lot of people don't let NVDA be used because it's an open source, but they will allow JAWS. So a lot of little things come involved.
And that kind of ties to another really good point that I wanted to make in regards to they can bring in some technical support in regards to making sure that your system is functioning, that JAWS is functioning properly and things like that. But it is not the employer's responsibility to provide you training on how to use JAWS specifically. Maybe they can provide you training with how JAWS interacts with their specific proprietary software. Like, hey, here's the shortcut keys. Here's some known bugs that we've encountered and how to work around them. But they can't sit with you and say, here's how you use JAWS in Windows. Here's how you use it on Word. Here's how you use it on Internet Explorer. You have to come with those basic skills in order to be considered employable so that you can be able to access the same equipment that a sighted person can.
Yeah, qualified, just like the ADA states, reasonable accommodations for qualified employees. And even though you may be using PC and a Windows-based computer, you may come across a glitch where you're not able to access certain parts of the database because of one button. And so working with your state services for the blind, your vocational rehab, employment specialist, they may be able to create some scripts or have someone create some scripts to bridge that obstacle that's stopping you from completing your essential duties, because not everything is always JAWS friendly or NVDA friendly. You're not alone in this. Working with your state services for the blind, your vocational rehab, and their team can help you gain access to something that may be just right there on the screen, like a button, a physical looking button. Everyone wants you to succeed, and working together with the agency and your employer is sometimes a team effort and highly essential.
And you might find yourself in a situation where maybe you're working for a smaller company or a nonprofit, and they're kind of saying, I'd love to be able to provide you these accommodations, but we really it's a hardship for us. As a side note, any business that has 14 employees or less, the ADA unfortunately does not apply to them. There's some other exceptions like religious organizations, things like that. So that makes it a little bit harder sometimes to get those accommodations. When that happens, that's where it's especially important, like Jeff said, that you're partnering with perhaps a vocational rehabilitation or even a career counselor of some sort to be able to talk with that particular employer so that they understand maybe some of the tax benefits that they have, or maybe if it really is a hardship for them, to cost share in that accommodation through some dollars from vocational rehabilitation or grants or other types of resources, because we really do want to see you working, and we'd hate for something like an accommodation to be what stands between you being able to work successfully, especially in the right supportive environment. So definitely make sure you're connected with who you need to be to have those conversations.
Yeah, and that's why it's great to stay on top of your technology so you can best use your technology, and your technology will take care of you.
So we've been talking a lot about this whole undue hardship thing, and I don't know, Jeff, do you really know what that definition is? Because it's super vague, right?
It's pretty vague. Reasonable accommodation, undue hardship, it's wide open.
So an undue hardship is something, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, but it could be something that logistically causes issues for the company or agency, or financially causes issues for them. That would just make it really impossible for them to be able to implement that accommodation that you're requesting. For example, a reasonable accommodation might not be an undue hardship for a company like, let's say, Microsoft or Apple, but it might be for the really small cafe that you're working for down the street. The difference being that maybe a Microsoft or an Apple has significantly more logistical and financial resources than a very small company that employs maybe 20 people. That's why it's so vague, because it's one of those, it depends. I think in a lot of situations, we can't request that an agency completely change the types of computers that they're using or physical layout of an office. Maybe it's difficult to get with your cane. There's just no way that we can ask that they change, but it's certainly worth asking if you have maybe some scripting that needs to get done. Scripting, as you know, might be pretty pricey. It can get pricey real quick, but it might not be an undue hardship to maybe a government agency, because that empowers them to be able to hire more individuals with disabilities down the road, which most of them, if they receive federal funds, are required to hire a certain percentage of individuals with disabilities.
And some of these companies do, by working with their state, do get reimbursed for the money that they do spend on reasonable accommodations. So there's a lot of other factors than just thinking that you're burdening the company undue hardships, when actually, if you're working with your vocational rehab or your state services for the blind, they all want you to work, and there's monies and dollars that they can utilize to provide some of this stuff. Not all of it, but some of it. That's why it's nice to be working with a team when you're going about this stuff. If you're already employed and you're trying to just get some reasonable accommodations, like IRA is out there right now, and some people feel that IRA would help offset the cost that it might be to have a reader. And you've gone through some experiences with that, Serina.
I was just about to say, you're saying some people. I'm like, is that code for Serina?
Well, there's more people in the world than just you, though, Serina.
No, of course not. It's all about Serina. No, but seriously, anyone who knows or has been listening to the podcast knows that I absolutely adore IRA. It's something that I'm hoping to be able to get as a reasonable accommodation, especially as of late with the type of job that I have. I rely upon a reader and sometimes a driver to kind of get where I need to be. And it's been a little bit of a struggle to keep a steady reader. Not through any fault of, the readers that I've hired, but when I'm only offering you 8 hours a month, you're going to find a full-time job at some point. And I totally support and understand that. And I love seeing people grow and move into different positions. But it does make it where it is super stressful, not only training a new reader, but kind of getting out of that awkward, hey, I kind of know you, but I don't, because when I have a reader with me, they're with me the whole day, or maybe at a school, or maybe we're reading medical records for half a day. It's a lot of one-on-one time, and sometimes it can be difficult training and getting to know that person without being rude. Like, I don't know if you've ever had a reader, Jeff, where they're going through a lot of papers for you. Sometimes it feels rude, like, okay, I don't need that. Nope, keep going,
Oh,
So,
the hiring and firing of a reader. Yeah.
Stop.
IRA, by any definition of the Americans with Disabilities Act, is a reasonable accommodation. It is something that should be usable and used by you on the job. I can take almost any job that you can imagine and find a way IRA can help. Because again, remember what IRA is, an information source. It provides you with what information you need. Most of what you do on copiers these days are touchscreen, but I can become as good a copy expert as anyone else if I have access to it. And I do, because I can use IRA. Filing. Obviously, IRA agents being able to read information so that I can put things in the right folder, and even creating the tabs to go in folders or whatever. All of those things are commonplace, everyday tasks that you should be able to do as well as anyone else. But you can't if the equipment isn't accessible.
I've tried the free trial of IRA, and I found all kinds of things I could use them for at work to read the records on my time without having to go bother an admin that I have in the office or get somebody to glance at something. I mean, it literally took maybe a minute to do what I needed to do instead of having to go ask somebody else. And like I said, I'm hopeful that I'll be able to get that as a reasonable accommodation. I guess we'll give you an update on a future podcast, see how that goes.
Oh, yeah. I did the free trial and I turned around my keyboard. It's a roll-in keyboard and there's some switches in the back. Not switches, but plugins. And my agent took a picture of them and then sent it to me. She labeled it from left to right, what these 5 plugins were. And then we moved my camera over to the other side and she took a picture and labeled, I think there were 6 inputs there, and labeled them with a comma, so it would read one, then the next, then the next. So I just saved the pictures on my computer and boom, now I can just go over there, feel it, and then just listen to what it says, and I know exactly which one's which. So it was one of those things that I want to try it for something, and I'm glad I did it. And it worked out really great. And what did it take? 3 minutes? 4 minutes?
And how many minutes did you spend cursing at the keyboard trying to figure out what was what before you did that?
Oh, I didn't. I just didn't do it. It's the last thing that I have in my studio here to hook up, and it's been sitting like that for three and a half months. Just because I didn't want to bother someone. It was perfect. And I really liked the experience. So it's got me really thinking about maybe starting out with the $29 30-minute program per month.
I definitely think that 30 minutes would be a really good starter plan, because I at first was like, 30 minutes, I'll use that in 2 sessions, but going through the trial, I actually did not use my free 30-minute trial. I think I used like 3 or 4 minutes of it in the 7 days. So over a month's time, I think I'd have plenty.
Yeah, I was shocked too, because I thought I would be eating up all these minutes real fast. But it's amazing how you go about things. You've already figured out how to do a few things. But that was one thing that I wanted to do. And now that I'm thinking about it, there's another thing that I wanted to do, but I didn't find the time to do it. So there is a few things, and I think that would be perfect for me for starting, and I'm glad they got that new option. And to find out more about IRA, you can find them on the web at www.aira.io. And alternatively, you could use Be My Eyes, which is an app that you can get on Android or iOS, which uses volunteers to help you by using your phone camera. And that's at BeMyEyes.com.
Well, and at work, not every accommodation that you need necessarily has to go through the interactive reasonable accommodation, like formal process. Maybe you just need some bump dots on the microwave in the break room. Pretty sure you can ask your coworkers if they're cool with that. I would not use your resources to go through the reasonable accommodation process to just put some simple bump dots on there. Unless it's like a significant amount that you're labeling like in 20 different break rooms or something maybe, and it's just a lot of cost. I would see that as something that you could just bring in a few from home. I think it'd be easier that way for everyone. You can by all means put that through there, but gosh, what are they, like $12 for like 40, Mm-hmm. Sure, you have some at home that you're comfortable with,
Yeah, and if you're looking for bump dots, you can get them from the NFB store. They sell them. They're very reasonable. Every time I go to a convention, I always grab another handful of the small, medium, large bump dots. And they have these jumbo ones. I sent you a couple of jumbo ones for your bottom of your mixer.
You did. It's not wobbling anymore.
And you can also pick some of these up at the hardware store. You just go where the door stops and all that other stuff is, and someone will find them. Love to help you.
I never knew that they had them at hardware stores. Like, what do they call them at the hardware store? Because I'm sure they don't call them bump dots.
They're right next to the little felt things that you put underneath knickknacks so they don't scratch your table.
Oh, I know what they use them for. The cabinets so that they don't just bang into each other.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's creative.
Kind of a soft close. Yeah, you can go pick them up there. And they're about the same price.
Good to know. I'm going to the hardware store this weekend. I need to relabel my stove. The ones I had on there started falling off. Sorry. We get so distracted here on Job Insights, but it wouldn't be a show with Serina and Jeff if we didn't go off on a tangent. So
we're talking about if you're going to be employed or you want to be employed or you are employed, I wouldn't look at the little stuff like the microwaves and stuff like that as something. That's something like during your break, you can just say, hey, dude, where's the on button? Thanks. Stick it on there. And by then, people know you. No one's going to bother about a little bump here and there. But with reasonable accommodations, sometimes people want to label folders or files. So what do they got? The ID mate is a practical thing to use. That way you can log your information.
I personally use an ID Mate, and I've also seen people use the Pen Friend. For those who aren't familiar, the ID Mate is basically a handheld barcode scanner, and it comes with UPC labels that when you scan them, you can record a custom audio message. So for the type of work I do, I have clients that all have individual service records. So on every single new service record that I get, I use Seeing AI to identify who the individual is. Then I stick a UPC code on there, record their name on it. So then as I'm going through my file cabinet, I just have my barcode scanner in my hand and I scan each file until they're in alphabetical order so I can reasonably get close to the one I need. That's how I know that I've pulled out the right file. The Pen Friend works very similar, except it's not with barcodes. It's with stickers that you put on there that do have to be touched by the Pen Friend in order to read the custom audio message that you record on it. But a very similar process.
And if you want to find out more about the ID Mate, you can go to www.envisionamerica.com. ENVISION America.com. You tell Dave Reistrek that we sent you. We'll also put a link to the latest interview we did with David Reistrek from Envision America in the show notes. So check it out.
I am honestly not sure who makes the Pen Friend, but we will be sure to put both links in the show notes for you guys.
Yeah, that's really neat. With the ID Mate, it will read it back to you in your voice.
It does, and it's so funny because I'll have people in my office sometimes, and I forgot who was in my office, but I told them, oh yeah, this is my voice on here, and they were like, I've worked with you for this many years, and I never realized that was your own voice on there every time.
Oh, wow.
I like it. I've had that one for 9 years now, and it's not the oldest one, it's not the newest one, but it does exactly what I need it to do.
Serina, I've heard from some people who, work at larger companies, they have printers available to them and they just access it from their computer. So that works pretty good for them.
I'm not lucky enough to have that. I wish.
Yeah, so you're not just going to be able to go in and get a talking fax machine, a talking copier. When we're talking about reasonable accommodations, it's reasonable because it just gets you over that little bit so you can be productive and do as everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't usually have to fax anything, but if I did, our fax machine happens to be quite tactile, but if I did need to use it, I would maybe label a few key buttons so that I knew maybe this one was start, stop, scan, whatever I needed. And then our copy machine actually has a touch screen, but I have some very strategically placed bump dots on the edges of the touch screen that let me know, because I only have 2 buttons that I really care about, and that's the one for stapling things and the one for turning from 2-sided to 1-sided, and then our start button is a regular button. So sometimes it's just about getting creative. I've also seen overlays made for copy machines that are touchscreen, where maybe your VRT, a vision rehabilitation therapist with maybe Voc Rehab, helps you kind of customize it. It's a silicone overlay that they can maybe cut out different spots. And when you stick it over it, the cutout is exactly where the buttons are that you need.
Yeah, a lot of creative ideas are out there. It always doesn't have to come down to the big dollars. Sometimes it's just a little ingenuity and a little craft work.
Yeah, and one frustrating thing that sometimes happens in offices for blind and low vision are the dang phones. You wouldn't think that it would be a big deal, but the landline phones, because most places still use the old school landline phones even for-profit businesses. And sometimes there's a lot of things you can do with those phones. And unless you're lucky enough to maybe have like a Cisco system or something like that, it's not always the most accessible. So sometimes it's just a matter of labeling some key buttons and working through the fact that you don't have the caller ID, things like that.
Like using the Seeing AI app for its features that it has. There's also Envision AI, which has magnification built into it. And there's Over 40, which is just a magnification. Envision AI and Seeing AI also have barcode readings, so you can get some information that way. So some of these apps that are available to us today can also work in the workplace. And that's a great thing. We just use them for everyday stuff. But when you can utilize them in the workplace, that's a plus. And speaking of low vision, a CCTV can be utilized and put into the workplace. So there are a lot of innovative solutions that you can bring to the table, especially when you're with your team trying to figure out how to overcome some obstacles. Some may be right in your smartphone right now.
And I think you mentioned IDMate. I think that we once had a client that was going to start doing like stocking or inventorying at a major retailer. And I believe that they worked with that retailer to have their database downloaded to the SD card that goes into the IDMate so that it literally would identify all of the products. And I think the latest version of the IDMate even has an inventory function on it, where if you ran a BEP site or something like that, you could inventory all your items using the IDMate.
Oh yeah, the Business Enterprise Program, and that's run through the state voc rehabs. Each state has their own. A lot of the guys do use those, and they just doot. I think it sounds different than that, but that's my impression.
Jeff has been replaced with the barcode scanner.
Yes.
IDMate is still the standard for barcoding and using barcodes for accessibility with regard to labels. And yeah, a lot of folks use them in vending and blind enterprise program for work and jobs. It's always been a good product to keep jobs available to folks that need them. So IDMate has been around for a long time, and the Galaxy continues to, with its networking capability and that sort of thing, it really does well. So the barcode scanner itself that we have, the Galaxy, is network capable. It's battery operated. You can scan a barcode and it speaks back all the information in its database. If it doesn't find anything in its database, it will go online and search for information and bring it back and speak that out. So we have about 3.5 million items in the database right on board.
Well, the thing about reasonable accommodations, and we're talking about this just vaguely in a situation where someone's working, but it goes way to the left and way to the right. We just picked a little spot here to talk about it. There's a lot more we could go in on it, but we only have half hour.
We have unlimited time, Jeff. But seriously, though, this is kind of one of those tricky topics. So I would highly encourage you to, by all means, join the conversation on our JobInsights support group on Facebook. And Jeff, where can they find us on Twitter?
They can find us on Twitter at JobInsights VIP.
And we'd be happy to help you address some questions. And we've got a great community going on in both the areas as far as support, lots of different advice, lots of different ways that maybe somebody else in your similar situation has approached things. I love that the community that we're starting to grow. I think we have a little over 300 people in the group now, which I think is awesome because I think it's helpful to have just a supportive place to ask those questions. And the group is closed, so it means it's private, so people who don't belong in the group can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
We make sure that all the members of the group are there for the right reasons and are looking for advice and keeping it spam free for you guys.
Exactly. And just as unique as reasonable accommodations are, everybody is going to be able to help in different ways because we all don't fit the same mold. Everyone needs something different. And there's people with low vision, total blindness, so there's a lot of help for everyone.
So we are going to start chatting with our community and learn about what you guys do for employment. We might feature some of you on the podcast, do a little interview with you. So if you are wanting to tell your story and how you got to the career field that you're in, be sure to visit our JobInsights Facebook page and send us a message and we'll be sure to respond to you.
Great. So I want to thank you all for listening. Serina, great job.
You as well, Jeff. Thank you.
And we will see you next time on Job Insights.
Ba-dum-bum.
Enable the blind ability skill on your Amazon device just by saying Enable Blind Abilities. A big shout out to Chichow for his beautiful music. You can follow Chichow on Twitter at El Chichow. Chichow.
When we share
what we see
through each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap between
the limited expectations and the reality
of blind abilities. The realities of blind abilities.
For more podcasts with a blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com, on Twitter at blindabilities. Download our app from the App Store, blindabilities, that's 2 words, or send us an email at info@blindabilities.com. Thanks for listening.